Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 124, so look how far we've come, for the Planet Zoo mod spotlight. So we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today, we've got a very interesting assortment of animals, which I'm really excited to go over. Quite a few birds, a few extinct animals, and a couple cool mammals that I'm really excited to get stuck into. So we're going to be starting off today. We've got a couple mods by Lorby, and we have got, starting off, we have got the king quail, or as in the game also called the Asian blue quail. But the most common name I prefer is the king quail. These guys are a species of old world quail, and they are the smallest true quail and have quite a huge range. They range from southern China into South and Southeastern Asia and into Oceania, and can be found in Australia as well. It's found in South and Southeastern Australia as well, and it's quite a huge range. And was also introduced into New Zealand, and was trying to get them to acclimatize to there. The Otago Acclimatization Society tried to introduce them in the 1890s. But really cool birds. They're also quite common in aviculture worldwide, and they're often called the button quail, but they're not actually related to true button quails. They just kind of got that name. But yeah, really awesome animals. So you can see here, male quails, as you can see, can occur in many colors, but they have a blue, brown, silver, maroon, dark brown, almost black colors. But you can see that's also where they get the name the blue quail. I also have orange feet and that are hard and able to withstand living on the ground a lot, like most game birds. And females are quite similar to males, but they do not occur in those colors. You can see there's a baby. Oh no, there's an adult there. So the adult here you can see females a lot more dull, but you can see still quite pretty colors and have those blue shades. And they can live up to 13 years in captivity, but typically only 3 to 6 years in the wild. So it's quite typical of a lot of animals. They tend to live a lot longer in captivity than in the wild. So look at you, yeah. Look at the male, since you're much more interesting. While they may, in the wild, the male live 1.5 years, and the eggs of the quail are quite like a light creamy brown, and they have a top oval shape. So there are about 6 subspecies of these guys described, coming from India right up to northern and eastern Australia, so quite a wide range. Some of them have been described, and even some have been different species, things like that, but it's typically kind of, that's where it is at the moment. And reproduction, the males will kind of fight each other and try and fight for the rights of the female, and then one of them breeds with every female, and the female can develop and lay an egg actually 1 to 2 days of being bred, so they can have babies coming out pretty quickly, and they're quite cute. Females usually only get broody when they have an ideal clutch size, which can be between 5 and 13 eggs. And before incubation starts, all the eggs comprising the clutch have been laid. And in captivity, a clutch can be from 6 to 8 in captivity, and they will hatch after about 16 days. And in terms of conservation status, they are considered least concern. And some areas, though, in the state of Victoria or in Australia, there's some parts they are considered endangered. Just because of low populations, but typically all around they're doing quite well. And they're quite popular in aviculture because of a lot of mutations and things like that. They're quite hardy, and they have a lot of mutations, and because they live on the ground all the time, not too worried about flying away and things like that. And they're quite easy to buy, and they're typically housed in bird cages or in colonies, or even in planted aquariums, things like that. Not aquariums, aviaries. I don't know why you put a fish in a bird in an aquarium. That'd be a bit weird. But yeah, there are also hybrid mutations. You get piebald and albino and charcoals and other mutations, things like that. So people like breeding them like that. And in terms of their diet, these guys are eating all sorts of small things. They eat small bugs, seeds. We'll have a look at a male while we're looking at it. About that. Bugs, seeds, various grasses as well, available at the time. In captivity or in aviculture, they can be fed seeds and also fruits and vegetables. Though during breeding, they should be fed high calcium rich foods, such as egg or shell grit, something like cuttlefish bone is a good example, is to prevent egg binding. And newly hatched chicks should also be fed a high protein chick crumb mix, mixed with a lot of water. And other sources of protein you can provide for these guys, very similar to other birds you can provide, like mealworms and insects and things like that. So yeah, pretty generous little diet and quite a cool little guy. Lobby did a wonderful job with this one. So next up, we got another lobby bird. We're moving over to here. We have got the Maragay stork, I believe you say that, also by lobby. So these guys are a large South American stork that are very similar to the white stork, but a bit bigger, and the only species of its genus to occur in the New World, which is really interesting. So these guys are found around South America. There's a population north and south, and a little bit of non-breeding down in the more southern parts of their range. And they were thought to be a different genus, but now they're considered Cyclona because of their morphological characteristics, and they look quite similar to like Oriental storks and things like that. And there actually is an extinct stork that used to live in North America that appears to be quite similar, or morphologically intermediate between the white stork and the Marjorie stork, and is believed to be either a common ancestor or potentially link them as well. So there's a little bit of evolution going through there, so it's quite cool. In terms of the adult descriptions, adult bird stands at about 97 to 120 centimeters, or about 3 feet 2 to 3 feet 11 inches tall, and have a wingspan about 155 to 180 centimeters, or about 5 foot 1 to 5 foot 11, and make it similar in size to the white stork. And they weigh on average between 4.2 kilograms for males, while 5 females weigh about 3.8. So decent sized bird. But you can see they're not too distinct from other birds. They've got basically white feathers, and then a lot of their coverts and things like that are black. They've also got red legs and some red around the eye there. There's bright yellow eyes, and around the tip of their beak with a little bit of yellow at the tip of their beak. So not too distinct. And juveniles, they don't look too... they actually are quite weird compared to a lot of young storks. They have dark plumage when they're young, which is kind of not shown off here, but they can have a dark plumage, which is weird. And they typically will molt this time about 4 days, and then the black plumes will emerge on their head eventually, and they're kind of about a week old. They'll get this white down feathers, which is quite interesting. And they're also quite distinct for these cool vocalizations they make. They make these hissing and the wheezing sounds and things like that. They sound similar to similar storks like the woody neck stork and things like that. And they make these vocalizations linked with like nesting habitats, so they actually minimize kind of the attention of predators to these habitats, and they actually have the quality of them. And young make begging calls that goes like kind of really cute. In terms of their distribution habitat, these guys are relatively widely known across South America, and they occur primarily east of the Andes. They've been found in Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, and some parts of the Chiquibat province, also Uruguay and Argentina, and there have been vagrants found in Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago. And they're specifically common around Argentina, which seems to be a popular kind of place for them. Also found in the Pampas, things like that. And they typically live in large colonies, or like large habitats of like a open lowland, or particularly savanna, places like that. That's where they like to live. And they'll also be found in marshes, mudflats, and flooded fields. They also avoid forested regions because they don't like flying in them. And they live with other species of stork, like wood storks and things like that. It's quite interesting. So in terms of their diet, these guys are considered generalist. So they will feed on both, basically kind of everything, compared to even their relatives or compatriots or other species of storks that they live with. They're pretty generalist. They feed on everything from fish and frogs and insects. There's like earthworms, snakes, crabs, small mammals, and even like rats and bird eggs. So they're quite generous in that regard. They will forage in water that's up to about 12 centimeters deep, and then try looking for fish and smaller vertebrates that way. And during the breeding season, they can be found in pairs, though they may feed in larger aggregations while together, often with other species of wading birds. And they largely depend on shallow freshwater for prey. They also have been seen foraging around dry plains looking for mice and toads and things like that. So they're quite generous in that regard as well. And even following cows or uplifting cow hides in dry fields to kind of look for invertebrate prey and things like that. So pretty generalist and hunting around, looking for pretty much whatever they can find. They're pretty generous in that regard. In terms of breeding, they have a pretty different, unique breeding system that's a lot different than a lot of the other species of storks, which is quite interesting to get into. So these guys, unlike a lot of other storks, they'll breed on the ground, where the most will kind of nest at higher elevations. They nest near like shallow water, amongst the tall reeds and grasses. And since aquatic organisms are basically the bulk of their diet, and they typically like hanging out in these reeds. They'll make these large nests that can be 1 meter high and up to 2.5 meters in diameter, quite big, and that's really interesting. And also in the Venezuela, they'll actually make them in low trunk trees as well. So typically around the ground, which is quite weird. And they're also primarily a colonial nester, although they least frequently will nest solitarily. So typically will nest together, which is actually quite interesting. And the survival rate at form appears to be more consistent. So typically when they live in colonies, they tend to have a much higher success rate of like fledging. And colonies will typically consist of 5 to 15 nests, which are about 50 centimeters apart in tree colonies, but can be at different heights as well. Also, in terms of courtship, although colonial breeding is common among storks, these guys will actually takes place with established pairs will just remove themselves from a nesting site and kind of sort them things out. They have unique nesting behaviors not observed in storks and may actually be a adaptation to like be breeding on the ground and nesting on the ground. They typically will form like nest covering displays to protect nestlings from predators, and during this display they'll droop their wings and kind of make their feathers erect and kind of pretend they're like that, and it's an adaptation to look kind of hide in the vegetation, things like that. And they have these other displays to basically try and entice females like that. Egg laying and nesting. Breeding is highly synchronized to the raining season, the rain during the wet season. And it typically lasts around May to November in Venezuela, but in other parts of the world it can be a little bit different, so it just depends. Typically the clutch size for these guys is about 3 to 4 eggs, with an average of 3 reported. Eggs are also laid on alternate days, and they all hatch around hatch about a week apart potentially. And incubation will start after about the third egg is laid, or the second egg is laid, and lasts about 32 days. And that's where they do. And there's weight differences have been reported between like 500 to 1400 grams sometimes. And they become sexually mature once they fledge. They become sexually mature at about 3 years old for males, and females at about 4 years. And there seems to be some sibling rivalry and things like that, and more mortality being the young falling out of nests because they push each other around, things like that. But yeah, typically do pretty well. In terms of threats to survival, these guys generally are doing okay. I believe they are considered vulnerable or least concern. Yeah, they are considered least concern. But there are some threats to their habitats, of course. Things like anthropogenic, like habitat destruction. So things like clearing for forests and clearing of habitat and draining wetlands for these guys can be a bad thing. Digging canals as well. But they are naturally eaten by boa constrictors and caracaras, which eat their nests. Also, predators include crocodilians, jaguars, Maine wolves, pampas cats, things like that. But that's just natural predation. But in terms of humans and their reasons declining, could be a lot because of humans digging canals, draining wetlands, common human disturbances like that, creating agriculture, things like that. But they're potentially threatened by the Pantanal, which is actually considered considerable land reclamation from agriculture. And they actually had dams and things like that, and that drains a lot of the wetlands during the dry season and affects their habitat, of course. But yeah, cool. Also, relationship with humans, they have been historically kept in captivity since, like, in places like London Zoo since the mid 1800s, and there is quite interesting in that regard. There's been some breeding in captivity. They don't really breed in captivity much, these guys, because they're least concerned. They're doing all right. And they're considered least concerned because it's such a large range, and they also have a very stable population that is believed to be large. Though in some areas they are considered vulnerable, such as Venezuela, where their population has declined to less than 5,000 individuals in the 1980s. But some conservation work has been going up into protecting their habitat and protecting wetlands and things like that. So they have kind of gone up a bit. So they are doing pretty well in most regards, which is always really good. So yeah, another really awesome Lorby mod. Really came out well. So next up, we have got another bird. This is going to be our last bird for the day. We have got by Narwhal and Leaf. This one's been remade by Narwhal. This mod was originally made by Leaf. We've got the Gentoo Penguin. So the Gentoo Penguin is a species, or potentially a species complex, I won't go into that too much, of penguin. They're most closely related to the Adelie penguin and the Chinstat penguin, and were first discovered around the Falkland Islands. So in terms of taxonomy, as I'm going to go a little bit, there's one of 3 species in that group, including the Adelie and Chinstat penguin. And there are four subspecies. There's the eastern, northern, southern, and South Georgia Gentoo penguin, which have been described as different subspecies, even sometimes species sometimes. But it seems to be a lot of them may have been just closely related. They're all right now pretty much all considered the Gentoo penguin. And in terms of description, they can be easily kind of recognized if you go to aquariums with penguins. These are probably, with Antarctic penguins, you could say. These are probably one of the most common ones you'll see. So they have wide white stripe around their head and around their eyes. They also have the bright orange bill, and they've also got this counter shading going on, which obviously helps them camouflage in the water so they don't breaks out their outline. So you can see they've got the light stomach and the dark back. And they have fairly long tail, which is actually the longest tail of any penguin species, which is quite interesting. And they waddle around side to side, and hence they got the scientific name Pygostelis, which means rump-tailed. So they sweep their tail side to side when they're walking sometimes. And they're actually the third largest penguin species alive today, second only or third only to the king and emperor penguins. So these guys can reach a length of about 70 to 90 centimeters, or about 28 to 35 inches, and makes it the third largest after the emperor penguin and the king penguin. They have a maximum weight for males of about 8.5 kilograms just before molting, and a minimum weight of 4.9 kilograms before mating. For females, they get about 8.2 and a little bit 2.5, so still quite big animals. And the birds from the north average about 700 grams heavier than those that are more southern. And southern gentoos reach about 75 to 80 centimeters in length. And they're actually the fastest underwater swimmers of all the penguins. So they're quite speedy. They get about 36 kilometers an hour, or about 22 miles per hour. And can be quite well adapted for swimming around in the deeps, things like that. In terms of breeding, let's have a look at the little babies while we're talking about breeding. Look at this little guy. Look at this little cutie. So the breeding colonies of gentoos are typically found on ice-free surfaces. So they're typically found around shorelines and islands. Like South Georgia's a really big breeding island for them. There's also like many subantarctic islands, such as the Falkland Islands, the South Sandwich Islands, Macrae Islands, the Cossett Islands, South Shetlands, and the Antarctica Peninsula. But the total population is estimated to be about over 600,000 birds. So I consider least concern, I believe. Yep, they are considered least concern because of that. Doing quite well. And nests are typically, they breed monogamously, and infidelity is typically punished with banishment from the colony. So these guys are very traditional birds, they want monogamy and all that. And nests are usually made from like a roughly circular pile of stones. They can be quite large, about 20 to 25 centimeters in diameter. And these stones are jealously guarded, and their ownership can be protested by physical attacks and noisy disputes between penguins. So they collect these stones and prize them, and they are prized among females, even to the point that a male penguin could obtain the favor of a female by offering her a choice stone, which is pretty cool. And 2 eggs are laid, typically probably about 130 grams, and parents will share incubation, changing duty daily. So one will go out to basically do its own thing, and the other will will sit on the egg, things like that. They typically will hatch of about 34 to 36 days, and the chick will remain in the nest for about 30 days until joining the other colonies and forming creches. And then the chicks will stay in this kind of plumage. You can see this is their subadult plumage. Typically stay in that and go out to sea at about 80 to 100 days old. So in terms of their diet, these guys are mainly live on crustaceans and fish. They'll feed on krill and shrimp, but they'll also eat fish and crustaceans. They will feed on pretty much everything. They'll feed a lot of fish, squid, lobsters, squat lobsters, things like that. Pretty generalist. In terms of their physiology as well, they have a salt gland, very similar to a lot of other marine bird species, to be able to take out the sodium in their diet. And they actually do not store as much fat as Adelie penguins, as these guys require less energy investments with hunting, as a net gain of energy of hunting is greater in gentoos. So gentoos eat a lot more degraded gentoos, which is really cool. And as embryos, actually require a lot of energy to develop. They also got quite high oxygen consumption as well, which is quite interesting. In terms of predators, these guys are commonly prey for animals such as leopard seals, sea lions, and killer whales that all prey on them. And on land, they typically have no full predators for a full-grown healthy gentoo, but skuas and giant petrels will hurt and kill baby petrels. And various other seabirds will also snatch, such as cap gulls or snowy sheathbills, will snatch like the chicks and eggs. But typically they're doing alright in that regard. Typically, though, the conservation status of the Gentoo penguin is actually rapidly increasing, so that's quite good. During the recent climate change, these colonized previously inaccessible areas, so they're actually doing quite well in that regard, which is weird. And as of 2019, they're at least concerned with a stable population trend, though there are some populations that are declining and some that have been increasing. So Bird Island has, and South Georgia has populations declined by 2/3. But there's many threats to the species, including pollution, hunting and fishing around the Antarctic, especially pollution's a bad one, that continues to affect them. But they seem to be doing okay, and also climate change, of course. While they're managing to colonize areas that were inaccessible before, climate change is also going to be an issue because that warms up the water and makes it harder for them to find food. But yeah, look at these really cool guys. Oh. And we got an albino one. We're going to have a cheeky look at the albino one. Came out rather well. And also has a baby. Really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of these Gentoos. So, next up, we've got a couple mods by Scott. So, we've got an extinct, really cool crocodile. I've covered this before, but we have another one here. So, this is VOR. So, his full scientific name is VOR Robustus. So VOR is an extinct genus of crocodilian from Madagascar and lived during the late Pleistocene up into the Holocene, so went extinct only about 2,000 years ago because of people in Madagascar, as we'll get into. Numerous subfossils have been found, so they're basically bones that have partly fossilized, but not quite. They show that they have this quite distinctive pair of horns on their back here that really gives that distinctive look. They've also got found bits of vertebrate osteoderms and things like that. The genus is thought to become extinct relatively recently, as I mentioned, and have been suggested to disappear during an extinction event that wiped out a lot of other Madagascar megafauna. That includes elephant birds, a lot of the giant lemurs, the dwarf hippos that lived in Madagascar. They are believed to have gone extinct around 2,000 years ago, following the arrival of people. And they got the name VOR Robustus, that's the genus name. So Robustus just means they're robust. VOR is the Malagasy word for crocodile, so basically it just means robust crocodile. So that's quite interesting. Very interesting as well, they have these big horns on their back, as I mentioned. Their other related crocs, such as Albopchapusuchus, have these similar projections, but these ones are more like crests, but these guys have much more horn-like ones. They also have a shorter and deeper snout than the existing Nile crocodile, as well as much more robust limbs. So they may be a little bit better at walking and moving around, probably because Madagascar was actually a lot drier as well, so they probably did a lot more walking than a Nile crocodile. And these guys are quite big. They are comparable in size to Niles and saltwater crocodiles. They've been estimated to be about up to 5 meters and weigh about 170 kilograms. It seems a bit low. I believe they'll probably be a little bit more than that. The estimated suggests that these guys were the largest predators that live on Madagascar in recent times. And they seem to be, their size, stature, and behavior, they seem to be more like Nile crocodiles in that regard. And it's believed that there may have been a lot of competition with Nile crocodiles that swam to Madagascar, and great amount of competition where they coexisted. And it's actually recently proposed the only reason that Nile crocodiles migrated to Madagascar is because of the extinction of VOR, because that VOR would have outcompeted them. Though this was disproven by some crocodile specimens being found about 7,000 years ago, and or Nile crocodile fossils found or bones found in Madagascar that would have lived with VOR, so they may have lived together and competed. But these guys went extinct, and then the Nile crocodile kind of took over. But yeah, really, really cool. These guys were first described in 1872 and was originally considered a member of Crocodylus. And then it was lately found to have more in common anatomically with the existing dwarf crocodiles, or Osteolaemus. But then more research and stuff as well. There was a 2021 study that used paleogenomics, so they took the DNA from subfossils of VOR and looked at the genetics of them. I actually found that these guys are a sister group of Crocodylus, so they're more closely related to crocodiles, like today, like freshwater crocodiles, than the dwarf crocodiles but they are much more basal, so they diverged from Crocodylus around the mid to late Oligocene. And a lot of the similarities with Osteolaemus may have been likely due to being more basal or potentially convergence evolution. They're really, really cool animals, really interesting ecology, and a very sad animal we lost, as we mentioned. We had it quite recently. Yeah, really, really cool animal. And I love how Scott has reconstructed it. Scott always does so well with reptiles. You can see Scott has really done a great job with this extinct animal. You can see the VOR here. And look at these cute little babies here. Look at these little cuties, little friends. Have a look at this one here. Really, really awesome. Definitely love getting all these extinct animals. Really, really cool. So that's VOR. You got another one by Scott. This time it's a tortoise. We've got the Atlas tortoise. Scientific name is Megachellis. It was originally named Colossichellis, but now it's considered Megachellis. So Megachellis, which means the great turtle. Oh, better come out of that a bit. Megachellis. There's an extinct genus of tortoise that lived from the Miocene to the Pliocene, and they get the name Megachellis because they're so big. They were among the largest known testudines, with a maximum carapace length, so this area here, of over 2 meters, in M. atlas, which is the largest here. So there are a few different species of Megachellis described. The biggest one is just this one here, M. atlas. So this is Atlas tortoise. Was the largest known tortoise with a shell length of between 2 meters and even, or about 6 to 8 feet, or about 2.7 meters, and a total height about 1.8 meters. There have been popular estimates of weight about 4,000 kilograms, so quite huge. However, these have been based on volumetric displacement of the skeleton, and some other estimates probably put them more likely at about 1 to 2 tons, which is still enormous. And the only larger tortoises or turtles known were extinct ones such as the Archelon and Prostega from the Cretaceous and Stupendemes from the Miocene of South America. But there's also a similarly giant tortoise from the Pleistocene of Europe, which is called Titanochelon, which had a shell length of up to 2 meters. So it wasn't like alone up there with being the biggest, but it's definitely up there as one of the biggest, and quite famous for that in that regard. And very similar to modern Galapagos tortoises, these guys would have had 4 elephantine-like feet and were herbivores going around grazing. So Megachellis itself, these guys were believed to be more closely related to African spurred tortoises, or the genus Centrochellis, and with both being more closely related to star tortoises. So it's believed to be the closest relative is sulcata tortoise today, which is quite interesting. And a few species have been described. They originally were described, valid name had been called Lossichellis, but now they're considered Megachellis because Megachellis was the first one described. The Megachellis atlas was found in the late Miocene, early Pleistocene of India, Thailand, places like that, also around like India, places like that. And there are some other species that lived in islands such as Sordonii that lived in the Philippines. There's also one undescribed one from Flores, which probably lived in the early Pleistocene and lived in Flores, potentially with the hobbit, Floresiensis. So some island populations as well, but the biggest one, as you can see here, would have lived around India and the mainland. So, you guys are like walking into each other. I'll have a look at you anyway. So pretty. I love these guys. Anyway, we believe they went extinct because of Homo erectus. So Homo erectus started spreading around the world about 1.3 million years ago, around the early Pleistocene, where these guys were going, kind of went extinct. And it's believed to be the staggered extinction on the islands, which actually corresponds with the arrival of Homo erectus in these areas. So it believed that these guys were very easily able to be killed by Homo erectus, because even though they have their shells, they can't run away. So a Homo erectus with a sharp stick could just kind of get under a tortoise and just stab it, pretty much. So it's believed to be how they went extinct. The genus went largely extinct by the early Pleistocene, but it was lived on islands and probably went extinct as Homo erectus managed to colonize these islands, as they went through, of course, like either swimming there or waiting for climatic changes to make these islands connected to the mainland. So that's kind of how they managed to spread around. But yeah, really, really cool animals. I can love these guys. Definitely a big fan. Another nice one from Scott. So next up, we got another Narwhaler mod. We've got one based on everyone's favorite cute little guys. We've got here the European rabbit. So the European rabbit, or the conning is also known, these are a rabbit that are native to the Iberian Peninsula, France, and northwestern Africa, also the Atlas Mountains, but have been widely introduced elsewhere, which is, we're going to get into why that's bad for the environment, but also domesticated as well. They've declined in their native range, so they're actually considered endangered, but they're also really invasive, which is kind of weird. They declined in their native range because of rabbits' diseases, and This has also caused a decline of animals such as the Iberian lynx and the Spanish imperial eagle. So it's weird. It's also endangered in its native range, but it's also invasive pretty much everywhere else in the world. So very, very interesting animal. So in terms of their taxonomy, they're in the genus Lepus and closely related to animals such as like the hispid hares and riverine rabbits and things like that. In terms of subspecies, there are some subspecies. There's the common rabbit, the Iberian rabbit, the things like that. There's also the domestic rabbit, which is sometimes considered species. The common rabbit, the Iberian rabbit, the Mediterranean, the Cretan, the Caribbean, and the African rabbit. So these are kind of just major areas in their ranges and major populations. So these guys are considered smaller than European and mountain hares, but they also have shorter legs. An adult European rabbit can measure about 40 centimeters or about 16 inches, and they weigh about 1,200 to 200 grams or about 2 to 4 pounds, with the hind limb being about 8 to 10 centimeters. Other ears can be up to about 6 to 7 centimeters. The size and weight varies a lot compared on food and habitat quality. Pure European rabbits weighing up to 5 kilograms are uncommon. There has been one specimen kind of found about 2.8 kilograms. And like brown hair, the male European rabbits tend to be more heavily built than females, and which is quite interesting. And most of the fur of these these wild rabbits, I'm talking about the wild rabbits, tend to have a greyish color, but you can get brown ones sometimes and black ones, depending on areas. So sometimes when there's less predation, you get more black rabbits because there's less predation pressure, which is quite interesting. But you can see they've also got round faces, guard hairs. They've got long whiskers that are used to feel around for stuff. Big ears, those big long ears that they use for hearing. It also could be used to dissipate heat, which is also quite interesting. So in terms of their social behavior and life history, these guys live in warrens that can be between 2 to 10 individuals, with smaller groups having great breeding success. They're also quite territorial, and they will compete. Aggression will basically contribute greatly to the maturation process and helps ensure survival of the population. Females will be more territorial than males and not defend these areas, with territories being marked by dunghills. The home range for a species depends on like habitat, shelter, things like that, but they're generally small. They could be between 0.3 to 0.7 hectares, or about 0.7 to about 2 hectares. And during times of low rabbit density and abundance of food, the males will range larger than females, and then the European rabbits will tend to rarely stray far from their burrows, typically only about 50 meters or so. However, they may move as 500 meters if there's a big change in the environment, things like that. And they're quite gregarious. They live in stable social groups, and they will share a burrow system, where social structures tend to be looser when burrow construction is easy, and dominance hierarchies will exist in parallel for both bucks and does. And bucks, basically the highest ranking rabbits will get the best food, and it can be maintained with the dominant bucks will also sire most of the babies. And the dominants does have a priority of the best nesting sites, things like that. And subordinates do in large colonies will resort to using single entrance breeding spots far from warrens, which makes them actually more vulnerable to predation by foxes and badgers. In terms of reproduction, in the European rabbit system, in terms of breeding, they are polygamy. So lower status individuals will kind of form monogamous relationships. So if you're low kind of ranking, you'll have both male and females making monogamous relationships. But if you're higher ranking, especially the dominant does, that will have, the dominant bucks, they will have multiple females that they mate with. And they signal their kind of readiness to mate by marking other animals and inanimate objects with odor in their chin glands. So they kind of rub their chin on things and use that to kind of signal, hey, I'm ready to go. And though they will sometimes be equitable with each other, they can fight during the breeding season and things like that. And usually a succession of litters, usually 3 to 7 kids each, are produced. But in overpopulation areas, pregnant does may actually lose all their embryos just to reabsorb them because there's not enough space for babies. Why give birth when they're going to die anyway, pretty much? Shortly before giving birth, though, the doe will consist of a separate burrow known as a stop or stab. It's only an open field away from a main warren, and this is typically a few feet lined with grass and moss, where she will protect the kits and things like that, and from adult bucks and predators. Typically, gestation period for these guys is about 30 days, and the sex ratio for babies tend to be 1 to 1. Greater maternal investment over male offspring may actually result in higher birth weights, and kits born to the dominant doe or buck will enjoy better feeding grounds, and tend to grow larger and stronger than subordinate rabbits. And they're not uncommonly, they'll mate right after giving birth, but some specimens are observed nursing previous young while pregnant. So they're pretty much always breeding. You know, they say breed like rabbits. That's kind of literally true. Female European rabbits will nurse their kits once a night and only for a few minutes. After cycling is complete, they'll seal the entrance to their home with vegetation. They typically have a growth rate of 5 grams per day, but actually grow much of 10 grams in non-native ranges. And weight at birth is typically 30 to 35 grams, and that can increase up to about 200 grams about 21 to 25 days after they've weaned. And they're typically born deaf, blind, and nearly naked, and then they typically do not really gain the power of motion until 10 days of age. Their eyes will open about 11 days, and at 18 days of age, they will leave the burrow. And sexual maturity will be achieved at about 4 months old, and they do begin breeding about 3 to 5 months of age. In terms of burrowing behavior, these guys like to burrow in slopes and banks where drainage is most efficient, and they typically will have entrances about 10 to 50 centimeters in diameter, and they can be easily recognized. Vegetation growth is prevented by continuous passing and repassing of resident rabbits, and they can create these complex excavations that can be several feet deep. Typically, digging is done by pushing the soil backwards with their forefeet and then throwing it with the hind feet. And while most burrows are dug outside, some warrens will feature holes dug from the inside, which act as emergency exits and things like that. And the holes usually descend perpendicular about 3 to 4 feet. And the kits will sleep in chambers lined with grass and fur. Adults will sleep on bare earth, usually to prevent damp, likely to prevent damp with walls being secured by huddling as well. In terms of communication, these guys are also quite quiet animals, but they're known to make squeals and things like that, of course. And they will kind of grunt and create these small hiccups and things like that. But in terms of their ecology and habitat, these guys typically found in short grasslands and secure refuges, and they may dwell up to the tree line, but as long as their land is well drained and shelter is available. They typically like soil that is easy to dig in, so they like loose soil, and warrens tend to be larger and more interconnected in areas with chalk than those in sand, and large coniferous plantations only occur around the periphery areas. In terms of diet, these guys feed on all sorts of plants and grasses and things like that, so these guys will feed on herbage and grasses and wheats and things like that. And they'll also feed on things like high nutrient content. They'll also feed on sometimes fruits, and blackberries will be eaten, root vegetables as well. But typically they'll be, and they have actually been observed eating snails, so that's probably a little bit extra protein for these guys. And like other types of rabbits, they produce soft mucus-covered fecal pellet, which is ingested directly from the anus. And these soft pellets actually produce posterior to the colon and the hindgut, and basically is after the excretion of the hard pellets. So these protein-rich bacteria that can be passed down, and then swallows them, and basically allows it to go through the digestive system a second time. In terms of predators, in their native range, they'll be preyed upon by animals such as foxes, wolves, lynxes, wolverines, and dogs will feed on them. In places that they've been introduced, a lot of other natural predators will feed on them. Like Australia, they'll be fed on by dingoes and other predators in those areas, but they don't do too well there. The European rabbit actually makes 85% of the Eurasian polecat's diet, and also European lynx as well. Brown rats can actually be a serious threat to kittens, as they'll live in the rabbit's burrow and attack them. Large species such as golden and sea eagles will eat them as well as other birds and eagles and things like that, which is quite interesting. And in terms of the human relationship, recent research actually suggests that these guys have these lines actually kind of depended from 12,000 years ago. They would have lived in Iberian Peninsula in southern France, and humans likely would have just begun eating rabbits. Then eventually we liked them, we introduced them to places such as Great Britain, and eventually we even started taming them. We domesticated them. They're the only rabbit species to be domesticated, and there's about 305 rabbit breeds, ranging from the Netherland dwarf to the Flemish giant, which are all descendants from eastern rabbits. And as an introduced species, they're exotic and quite invasive in a lot of areas. They've been introduced into the Balearic Islands and the Roman Crescent about 2,000 years ago. Other locations that have been introduced include Great Britain, Hawaii, Macrae Island, where they've been eradicated, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Ukraine as well. So they're quite invasive in those areas, especially in Australia. They outcompete a lot of animals like bilbies, um, along with being taken over because they get preyed upon by foxes and things. They outcompete for bilbies for areas and to live and things like that, and other kind of things, betongs. So that's a big thing as well. And they've also been domesticated. As I mentioned, they're widely domesticated. They were widely kept in ancient Rome as pets, as both food and people like them. Now people typically keep them as pets, and you can get the giant and dwarf varieties, and you get some that have fur, agora rabbits, and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of variety of rabbits and things you can get today. And in terms of conservation status, they're actually in their native range. They're actually not doing too well. Their populations are dwindling. Other areas are considered near threatened and endangered, but however, worldwide the species is considered endangered, with of course being quite invasive in places such as Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, UK, things like that, which is very, very interesting. But yeah, cool animals. I cannot love these rabbits. Nice mod by No Waller. This is based on the quokka, so it's actually pretty spot on. But yeah, next up, we've got last but certainly not least, we've got by Leaf, Jen, and Nicholas Line Rider. Don't know why you're spamming too much. Some of these mods have a little bit of issues, but we have got here, we'll have a look at you later. This is the Pacific Warus, or we'll just go by Waruses. So this is the Warus, or Obidomus romaris. These are a large pinniped that have been found. They have a range up in the Arctic that can be found in the subantarctic places like the Arctic Ocean and the Northern Hemisphere. There are typically two subspecies described. There's sometimes three, but mostly two at the moment. There is the Atlantic Walrus and the Pacific Walrus. These guys are the Pacific Walrus. So these guys live in the Pacific Ocean. In terms of their evolution, they are, of course, a mammal, and they're the group Carnivora, so they're related to other seals. They're actually their own group. They're the sole surviving member of the lineage Obidontine, which is one of the groups in pinnipeds. There's the true seals, the eared seals, and these guys kind of doing their own thing. They're walrus. They would have diversified from the other eared seals about 20 to 26 million years ago, and then kind of all did their own thing. And they would have evolved kind of this suction feeding mechanism as well in these large tusks. And it's believed to be these guys are actually descended from a tropical ancestor and kind of migrated up to the Arctic. And that's part of the reason why there's believed to be two subspecies, which actually diverged from each other about 785 to about 500,000 years ago. And it's believed to be there's a subtropical or tropical member became isolated in the Atlantic Ocean and then adapted to the colder conditions of the Arctic. So modern walruses are mostly known from the Arctic region, but there are some populations around Nova Scotia and Maine, things like that, during the early colonial period. There also believed to be some living in Iceland that were wiped out by the Vikings, but generally they do live in like more northern areas. So there are areas that have been eradicated from because of people, as I mentioned, like Nova Scotia as well during early colonial periods. Also, North Carolina, they've been observed as well. Fossils have been found there, likely during like interglacials. Yeah, these guys are huge. They're the third largest species of pinniped or seal. They went extinct around, not went extinct. They are the third biggest, so they are second only to the northern and southern species southern and northern species of elephant seals. So these guys, Pacific males get up to 2,000 kilograms, or about 4,400 pounds, and most weigh about 800 to 700 kilograms though. They can also get about 4.9 meters. So typically, Atlantic subspecies is a little bit smaller, but the Pacific one's a little bit bigger. Typical range for these guys about 800 to 1,700 kilograms, and that's kind of the average weight. And newborns are typical lengths for these guys about 2.2 to 3.6 meters, or 7 to 11 feet long. And newborn walruses are already born quite big, about 33 to 85 kilograms. It'd be 3 to 4 feet long, or about 1 to 1.4 meters across both subspecies. And as I mentioned, they are also considered the... let's see if I can find the male. That's the male there, I think. So yeah, you're looking not so over-the-top mental and fizzing out. They are the third largest pinniped after the two species of elephant seals. The southern is the biggest, northern is the next biggest, and then it's the walrus in terms of size. And they also maintain a high body weight because of the blubber, and that blubber keeps them warm and helps store energy, especially living in the Arctic where it's quite cold. as well. And one of the other main big features of these guys, you can see they've got those big tusks. So even though that's extinct, a lot of extinct walruses don't have tusks, but there are extinct ones with tusks. They have these long canines that can get to about 1 meter long and weigh about 5 kilograms. With tusks being slightly longer and thicker in males, and they use it for fighting and dominance as well. And they've also been used to maintain holes in the ice so they can come up to breathe and climb out. And they also were once thought to use to dig prey out of the seabed, but actually that doesn't show that's true. And they have relatively few teeth other than the tusks, because they're quite well adapted for eating things. Another really cool thing they have as well of lots of vibrissae, or kind of whiskers. They have about 400 to 700 vibrissae on their face, and this is used for their foraging. Since they forage a lot on the seafloor, they use that to feel around the seafloor looking for food. And they also, even though they look bald in terms of their skin, they have sparsely covered in fur, and they have quite wrinkly skin and a blubber layer that can be up to about 15 centimeters, which is pretty huge. And males will also have kind of these large nodules called bosses along their neck and shoulders. And they also have an air sac under their throat that acts like a flotation bubble that allows them to bob vertically while they sleep. And they also have a large baculum, which is a penis bone, and gets about 63 centimeters and is considered the largest of any land mammal, both in body size and compared to other animals. So it's absolute size. So the biggest out of any land mammal, but it's also the relative to the body size. It's big compared to its size, pretty much. In terms of its life history, reproduction, these guys can live about 20 to 30 years old in the wild. They reach sexual maturity at about 7 years for males, but they typically do not mate until they're 15 because they need to get big and defend themselves. They rut from January through April, and decreasing their food intake and obviously fighting for females. The females will then begin ovulating at ages between 4 to 6 years of age, and the female will come into estrus and come into heat around February, and the males are only fertile about February, things like that. Let's have a look at the babies while we talk about these guys now. So let's have a look at these little cuties. Typically, gestation lasts about 15 to 16 months, with the first 3 to 4 months being spent in a blasture. So they actually have delayed implantations that basically allows them to basically halt the development of the baby to wait until there's better food options. And it's quite common among pinnipeds to optimize both the mating and birthing seasons. And it's actually determined by ecological conditions to help promote the newborn survival. They're typically born about April to June, and they weigh between 45 and 75 kilograms, or about 99 to 165 pounds. And at birth, they're able to swim. The mother will nurse them for a year before weaning, and they can spend up to 5 years with their mothers, so they're quite good mothers. Walrus milk actually contains higher fat compared to a lot of land mammals, or land animals, but lower than a lot of seals. And this lower fat rate means they have a slower growth stage, and that means their mothers have to nurse them for longer. And because ovulation is suppressed until the calf is weaned, females typically give birth at most every 2 years, and they actually have the lowest reproductive rate of any pinniped. And typically in terms of migration, the rest of the year, late summer and fall, they'll tend to form massive aggregations that can be up to tens of thousands of individuals along rocky beaches and outcrops. Their migration between the ice and the beach can be long distance and dramatic. And in late spring and summer, for example, there's several 100,000 walruses migrate from the Bering Sea into the Chicxulub Sea through the Bering Straits. That's quite interesting. In terms of the habitat, these guys are typically, most of the Pacific walruses are found around the Bering Strait, around eastern Siberia, Wrangel Island, things like that, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, the Comanche Peninsula as well. There's actually also a 28,000-year fossil of a walrus found around the San Francisco Bay, indicating they would have lived likely that far south during the Ice Age, during the last Ice Age. But because we're living in an interglacial, they live a lot more north than they normally would. Commercial hunting also greatly reduced the population of Pacific walruses from about 50 to 100,000, between 50 and 100,000 in the 1950s and 60s. But limits on commercial hunting also increased populations as well, and believed to be the population now is about 220,000 as well. And it was estimated about 200,000 Pacific walruses alive in 1990. The population of Atlantic walruses, though, is much smaller, which is a little bit sad. They range from the Canadian Arctic around Greenland and Svalbard as well, and Nova Scotia as well. It's believed to be the population around 7,000 to 8,000 individuals. The most likely estimate was nearly eradicated. This population was nearly eradicated by commercial harvest, but their population is now estimated to be about 20,000. And they used to live around Iceland. There's to be genetic distinct population that went extinct after Norse settlement in about 1330 AD. But these populations are doing okay. And there's also doing less, but they're doing okay. Even though they can dive to deep depths beyond 500 meters, they tend to like shallow areas near the ice floes looking for food. And there was also walruses that have been found that were like, there was Wally the Walrus in 2021. They kind of drifted south around Ireland and things like that, but was killed and things like that. But there are more vagrant kind of walruses coming around. So it's actually believed, as I mentioned, they may have lived a lot more south as between ice ages, and also because of people eradicating populations that lived there, which is a little bit sad, but they seem to be doing all right in that regard. So Pacific walruses, about 200,000 left. The Atlantic walruses is probably about 20,000, and they would have lived around there. It's quite interesting. In terms of diet, though, this is another interesting thing. These guys are a very interesting diet. These guys prefer feeding on like shallow areas. They forage primarily on the seafloor, even on platforms as well. They're not particularly deep divers, but they only dive between like 31 to 70 centimeters, but they can dive up to 500 meters. They're quite opportunistic, so they feed on over 60 genera of marine organisms, including shrimps, crabs, tube worms, corals, mollusks like snails, squids, things like that, even slow-moving fish, and even parts of other pinnipeds, which I'll get into. However, they prefer bivalve mollusks on the seafloor. They tend to like graze on the seafloor. They kind of identify them with their whiskers and kind of suck them up. They have powerful suction feeding ability to kind of suck up food and suck basically the soft bits out of the shell of these bivalves. That's what they prefer. And they've actually been using this a lot. How they do this is they suck up the meat, they seal their powerful lips around the organism and use their kind of piston-like tongue to rapidly pull in their mouth, which creates a vacuum that basically just sucks them out. And one thing as well, it's really interesting. Aside from these larger, they often move the seafloor and they can't actually release nutrients in the water column. So they're quite important for the ecosystem. They release a lot of nutrients from the seafloor back into the open water as they forage. And they actually have been seal tissue observed to be in a lot of walruses, which is weird. And the importance of seals in walrus diet is under debate. There have been isolated observations of walruses kind of sucking the brains out of seals through their nostrils just by their powerful suction, which is pretty weird. And there've been the estimates, observations that they're preying on like bearded seals that get up to 200 kilograms. And walruses have actually been seen to occasionally prey on narwhals and scavenge whale carcasses, but there's little evidence to prove that. But in terms of predators, these guys have two natural predators, the orcas and the polar bears, though they do not have a significant component of either of them diet because they're too big, though they will prey on walrus calves and things like that. But typically, polar bears will only eat young ones or forage on them when they're on the land, and I imagine orcas could hunt them, but because they live in shallow water, they tend to be a little bit harder to get for orcas, though they will regularly attack them. But in terms of their relationship with humans, in terms of conservation, during the 18th and 19th century, they were heavily hunted by European and Americans, and led to the near extinction of the Atlantic subspecies. But now they're considered outlawed, hunting them in most of their range, though native people such as the Inuit and the Yupik are allowed to take small numbers just to sustain themselves. And walruses are regulated, the hunts are regulated by Russia and the United States and Greenland, so it's all regulated. But another interesting thing of concern is the climate change. So the thickness of the pack ice has been low for recent years, and they rely on the sea ice to kind of give birth and things like that. So that means they're coming more onto land, which means landscape's more crowded, which means they have lower reproductive rates. So it's kind of and also less nutrition, so they're a little bit worried about how climate change is affecting these walruses. But currently, both of these subspecies are considered least concern or data deficient, though they are kind of considered vulnerable sometimes, depending on who you ask, but that depends. But in terms of culture, as I mentioned, people like eating them. People have mentioned them in literature. Lewis Carroll's kind of bloody Through the Looking Glass as well. Alice in Wonderland, eats the oysters. But yeah, really, really awesome. And they're also quite common in captivity. A lot of people like them because they're quite charismatic. They can make funny sounds and things like that. Really, really cool animals. How can you not love walruses? They're all really, really cool. But yeah, this is done by Leaf, Nicholas Linerider, and Jen. done a wonderful job. I think this deserves a little bit of TLC. I think the females should not have quite as long tusks. Also, of course, this is a big issue, but I'm sure Leaf will fix that eventually. Yeah, really, really awesome mods. So, yeah, look at that wonderful job we've done today. All these wonderful mods. Thanks to like Lorby and Narwhalla and Scott and Jen and Leaf and all them for making these really awesome mods. So I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of loading things. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.